This morning's reading is from Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 to 21. Now, when Jesus heard this at the beheading of John the Baptist, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desert place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away, so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled. And they looked up what was left and over the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. We trust in you, Lord. In your word we have hope.
Thanks, Brian. The passage we've just heard, has some really key and deep and hopefully insightful, spiritually insightful, like food for the soul, parts to it. I really, I came to learn that the passage has a much even, like this is a passage that you and I would both know from our, if you were in youth group or Sunday school, and there's a number of Christian endeavours that are known as loaves and fishes, or, that's often it's a miracle that's referred to about the feeding of the 5,000. It turns up in a couple of the Gospels. And look, we all kind of, well, not all of us, sorry, but a number of us will have grown up with that as our one of those kind of core stories of the faith. I came to learn, for me, the backstory really helps me in this passage, because the backstory is that this passage in the book of Matthew follows straight on after. The reason why Jesus is going to a deserted place is because his distant relative and kindred spirit, John the Baptist, has just been beheaded. Just been beheaded. This is a story that in the wake of power being exercised to tell the people, don't you challenge the Romans, don't you challenge us, don't you stand up to us, don't you question us. We have the power and we will exercise it even to your death. That's the backstory of this. We don't read it in the passage. It's sort of separated from it usually. But that's the backstory. That's why Jesus gets in a boat, goes to the other side of the lake. Not because, maybe it's about fear a little bit. Maybe it's about recognising that he knows his time hasn't come yet. And I suspect he's maybe going to a deserted place to go and pray and to stop and to think about next steps and, like get away from get under the nose of the Romans and just go away to somewhere where he'll be safe. Now, on his way over in the boat, the crowd see him. Someone see, look, here's Jesus coming. And the crowds start to gather, even in a deserted place. People start coming and running to be there when he arrives. Now, I don't know about you, but there's probably, I'll admit it, there are times in my life when I go, oh no, just no. Like, give me a break. Like, please, stop. But I'm not saying it's an un-Jesus thing to do, to take time for yourself. But what I am saying here in this passage, what becomes really, really clear is that Jesus' response is compassion. So he gets to the other side, and it doesn't talk about any great teachings. It doesn't talk about, kind of like there's no time sitting down telling everyone. There's no Sermon on the Mount. There's no sermon from the boat on the lake. It's just he gets there and cures the sick. And there's people gathering and gathering and gathering, and I gather it must be a fairly long queue of people who are seeking healing. And they get to this point where it's evening mealtime, night's coming, and there ain't no McDonald's on the lakes of Galilee. So... And it's an interesting point, because it's sort of like the disciples have almost got this user pay mentality. Tell them to go into the villages and find food, which is a fair enough response. Like, we can't feed them all. So send them off to the villages so they can go and buy food. That's the disciples' response, which is fair enough. I'm not saying I think if I was one of the disciples, I'd kind of be saying, what, Jesus, it's, like, look at the sun's coming and it's going down, sort it out, like Jesus' response. And then this is what the parable becomes, this is what the story, we know it for, is that Jesus, out of 2 loaves and 5 fish, produces enough food for everyone with more left over. And as I say, it's this sense in which many churches have taken this view, and anything that we run on the smell of an oily rag becomes known as the loaves and fishes, and often that becomes a church mentality. Sometimes we fall into the trap of talking about the value of something by how little it cost us, like how we manage to do really good things on a really minimal cost. And there's this sense of sometimes the story is about scarcity. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should be reckless or unthoughtful with our resources, but I am saying here it's a risk that you can fall into, is that things become measured by how little they cost us or how much we manage to do on little. But look, this is the thing for me, that there are miracles in this story. And look, I don't know about you. I've watched Sandra and the team work in the kitchen at Ends Meat on a Wednesday, and I've not ever really seen enough come out of there to feed 5,000 people. They do a great job. There's lots of miracles every Wednesday around food. I've seen the Living English team meet around afternoon tea, and there's some left over. But like I've watched morning teas happen over at the op shop. And yep, there's a bit left over, but not enough to feed and feed and feed and feed, I don't know about you. I cannot turn 2 loaves and 5 fish into enough food for everyone. So look, for me, the miracle, beyond the story as we get it, is that there's something more than human about this. There's something that draws us into another space, beyond... into that divinity space. How do we allow ourselves to be drawn into this divine space where the Spirit of God is alive and active, beyond just human need? And for me, the miracle comes alive in this passage. And the thing we often miss is that in this passage, fear is met with compassion, and scarcity is met with generosity. And that's what draws this passage into another space, as I see it. It's in this space that God honours and acts and lives in us, through us, beyond us, and draws us into this otherworldly space, this kingdom of heaven on earth, when we allow ourselves not to get drawn into the stories of user pays, of scarcity, of fear. And those scarcity, fear are kind of words that are big on the world scale at the moment. Like everything seems that there's not enough to go around. There's not enough to share. There's not enough to, it's a real narrative of the world today. And we're invited through this passage, I think, to think better than that, to think bigger than that, to think more godly than that, to think more spiritually than that, to be open to the Spirit of God, drawing us from a place of fear into a place of compassion. In other words, not what about me, but what about everybody else? So that's the passage. And I could finish my homily there, all right? But I'm not going to, you know me. I want to share a story this morning, because this is a story that brings the passage alive for me. And I want to share it with you. And I want to be careful, because I don't want to share it from an over-romanticised space. And I've sat in spaces where I've listened to ministers carry on about their previous placements and the wonderful things that happened, and that's not what this is about. I just want to share with you where the penny dropped for me on this passage. And it was in my last placement. And for those of you who know my story at all, before coming here, I was here for a while. I was worshipping here, and Gal and I were living in Thirroul and worshipping here, and I had a role in the synod, and then I got asked to go to Bondi Beach, and the week before I was there, the ABC news cameras and Channel 9 news cameras had been there. There was a mob on the street because the minister had been moved on, the placement had been closed, and there was a whole mob of people who just weren't happy about that. And the news cameras were there. And then I was there the next week. I turned up the next Sunday to start leading things from there in sort of this interim space. And it ended up becoming a placement. But Bondi was in turmoil, and I remember the first Sunday I turned up, there was about 8 people there in the morning. They had appreciated the role of the presbytery in making the decisions that had to be made, but they were pensive, they were uncertain, they were a little bit scared. And as the service closed up, a mob started to gather and came upstairs to the chapel and started to fill the chapel. And I'm kidding you not that 8 or 10 people that made up the congregation were hiding in the photocopy room because they were scared of what was going on and they didn't really know what to do. And I didn't really know what to do either. I just, people were kind of being polite to me, but they felt the chapel was their space, and in they came, and they held a public meeting to complain, to plan, to scheme. There was labelling, there was anger, there was a whole range of things going on. And that was my first Sunday morning, right? And I had been told before I went to Bondi that there's an afternoon service. So we got through the morning service, the public meeting went for about an hour and a half or whatever, and the mob moved away and whatever. They were kind of polite to me, but they knew their view was I was just the relief priest and I'd be gone, and then they could get back what they wanted, what was theirs to own. Anyway, so I turn up later on that afternoon. I was told that there's a 3 o'clock service and you need to come and open the doors at about 2, and there'll be some people there to meet you. So I get there at about 2 to open the doors, and I'm met by 3 guys, three guys about my age, and they were, I remember it really clearly, they were kind of excited, they were sort of energetically anxious. I was holding them up. I'd arrived at 2 and I was late, They wanted to get upstairs because these 3 guys were the musicians for the afternoon service. So there were some quick introductions, and they, they gave me their names. They told me, they sort of looking at the time, we need to go up and practice and that sort of stuff. And so in this really quick conversation that happened at the door, and then as we went up the stairs, I learned very quickly about them that they were the 3 musicians, that there was a pianist, a bass player, and a guy on the harmonica. That was their afternoon musician. They were the musos. Over the years, the harmonica player stopped coming, and they added another 3rd person who played the drum. Well, he played anyway. So the other thing I learned about them was that all three of them had schizophrenia. All right, they told me that very clear. Inside the first minute of meeting them. Yeah, this is our names. All three of us have got schizophrenia. They knew each other from a place called Buckingham House, up in Surrey Hills. That's where they'd met, and they were all Christian guys. They go to a couple of churches, but the 3:00 service on a Sunday afternoon at Bondi Beach was the service they came to, where they got to play music together, and that was the thing they looked forward to in their week together, right? So that was the afternoon service. So probably about another one or two people turned up. And I was paid to be there, and there was about 5 people in total. And that's how things ran for about 2 years. All right? And I learnt to get there earlier. I learnt to meet them at about 12:30 or 1 o'clock. I opened the door, let them go up and practice, and let them go and practice and go and have my lunch with Gail or whatever, and then come back for the 3:00 service. I learnt to do that. But the thing is, as I say, there was just for about. In fact, the service times number of people at service got so small at times that we canned it, and we'd go to the football instead when the Roosters were playing at home, because they were all men of God and men of the Roosters, you know. So people of my own heart. It was so. So that's what we did, and just. If you ever catch me wanting to do something in a circle, to light a candle and do something in a circle, the root of that comes from this gathering that I'm talking about, because that's what we started to do. We canned the idea. I didn't give a homily. We just started to meet in a circle and just to chat and to go through the flow of a service, but light a Christ candle, put it in the middle and just chat. And somewhere in there, the Spirit of God started to work. I can't explain how, I can't explain why. But bit by bit, 1 or 2 people started coming down, because at Bondi Beach, the church runs a 5-day-a-week service, a community service, right, with showers, meals, community care coordinators, laundry, JPs, solicitors turn up, hairdressers turn up. It's a community. The church runs that. And after a while, a few of the people started to trust that they might start coming to church. And they did. And so the afternoon service, as I say, it just started to grow a little bit. And the generosity part of this story is that I remember really, really clearly one afternoon, we opened up this passage, and we were talking about generosity. And I'm talking to 3 guys and a few others who are homeless, who have lived their lives. These guys all lived in group homes. They had family around them who loved them, but it wasn't like it's not like they'd had lives of careers and jobs and, you know, family and that sort of stuff. Like none of them had partnered up and that sort of thing. And I'll still remember to this day, one of the guys almost pulling up in my middle-class tracks to say very clearly, you know, Graham, you don't have to have money to be generous. Because it's a middle-class thing, isn't it? We think that generosity is about what we give away out of our abundance. We think we're doing the right thing. And it is a good thing. It's a good thing to be generous with what we have. But I still remember to this day the conversation we had around the circle, around the Christ candle, that just went along the lines of, and this is homeless people. It's people who are just very clearly saying, and people with schizophrenia, people with all kinds of stuff going on. I mean, I sat in that room with people who were engaged in prostitution. I've sat in that circle with people who were, you know, kind of, and then it started to gather people who were, our volunteers started to come. And some just other people, a group of young people who were living in a group house picked it up and started coming along because of this generosity of spirit, particularly of those 3 guys. And I want to tell you a story. that in the middle of my story, is that when we passed the peace at Bondi, now it's all been killed off by COVID, right? It's all been killed off by COVID. Like interaction and shaking hands, and that doesn't happen anymore. We don't do it because we've learned, we just become far more aware. But when we passed the peace, it was an activity that sometimes took about 7 or 8 minutes, and there was only about 10 or 12 of us. Or 4 or 5 of us initially, because one of the guys in particular made a point of catching each and every person and standing there shaking their hands, holding your hand with both his hands, going, "Peace be with you. May the peace of the Lord be with you." And it's a welcome I've never really. You can't manufacture it. You know what I mean? You can't like it's just something about him that so genuinely wanted to meet you and greet you. And he would do it not once, but he'd forget who he got by the time he got to the end of the circle. So he'd get some people 2 or 3 times. And as new people started to come along, it was the most open door thing you could have. I mean, churches talk about all kinds of programs and all kinds of how to be an evangelist, how to, let's do a Bible study about blah, blah, blah. But you know what? Learning how to be a generous and welcoming church, I learnt this way, is the most powerful thing we can be. So the Spirit of God kind of acts in this really, really way beyond that. As I say, I can try and talk about it, but a lot of this is beyond my words because I can't understand it. Because why would people give up 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday when they could be at the beach or they could, but there was just something about the way that this group of 3 guys worked. And they weren't doing it intentionally. It wasn't it was just who they were, that they would welcome you. And it became this really precious, sacred space on Sunday afternoons. By the time I was leaving, and unfortunately COVID, as I say, killed off a lot of stuff, but there was up to 25 people on a Sunday afternoon. 25. No, that's not... I say to people, I was part of a church where I had 500% growth. We went from 5 to, what an amazing minister I am, Yeah. The more important part of the story I'm trying to share here is the generosity of spirit. Learning to be generous in spirit, learning to start from a place of compassion, is probably one of the most spiritual things we can do. And it's the place where God really joins in, catches us and grows us. I want to tell you one more story. It's an ends meet story. We've got someone who started coming along. She started through the art class, actually. Started coming to free. This is a really new story. It's only been about 6 or 8 weeks. And this woman started coming about 8 weeks ago. And headphones on, not engaging, just came to art. That's what she came for. All right, she came to art. And then and you couldn't get a word out of her. I suppose because maybe she's been hurt in other spaces, and so it takes a while to open up sometimes. Anyway, so she's coming to art, and she's been every week, right? And eventually she started coming down from art and staying, having the leftovers of morning tea, and then staying for lunch. Anyway, the reason I'm telling this story is it just took me, God, it was one of those God surprises. I kind of went, whoa, because I was standing with my back turned talking to someone outside the ladies' toilets, and she came out on Wednesday and she said, "Hello, Graham," to me, headphones off, so she could, and hello, and sort of gave me this smile and had a conversation, a brief conversation, but then went off to art. And the reason I'm telling that story is because I'd like to think that the generosity and the compassionate space that Ends Meet is bringing people to life. I'd like to think that. I'd like to think that's what's going, one of the things that's going on there. And I want to tell you that it's a part of our mission. It doesn't just happen in other places, it happens here too. That God grows things in us, beyond us, through us. When we learn how to be generous and compassionate and learn how to gather people and to actually learn and to act from a place of the abundance, the love of God that is abundant. And when that starts being our story, when that starts being the thing that drives our faith and our action, a story of abundance, it catches. And that's my encouragement to you this morning. It doesn't just happen in church buildings, right? This happens in all of our lives. When we go out on the street, when we go out to the shops, when we go out to meet family, whatever we're doing, learning how to start from a place of compassion and expect God's abundance to flow when we choose to be generous. Rather than letting scarcity or fear be what drives the narrative or the actions of who we are. Learning to go, you know what's important here? People. That's what's at the heart of God. So, friends, let's let that be our story. Let's let that be what pushes us and drives us to be who we are. You know, there's plenty of love and plenty of compassion, plenty of generosity, plenty of peace, plenty of inclusion and gratitude to be grown and to go around. When we choose to live in the way of God. And as we learnt this morning through the reading, it certainly is the way of Christ. Amen.